to LEAP 2020, powered by the Executive Advisors at Mahdlo Marketing. I'm your host, Joya Das, and I'm so excited to introduce our keynote speaker today, Alison Holzer. Alison, by the way, is the co-author of the new book, Dare to Inspire, Sustain the Fire of Inspiration, both in your work as well as your home life. She's also co-CEO of InspireCore. Alison, by the way, has spent the last 6 years researching and really understanding how inspiration works. She's done this through interviews with senior leaders across a range of industries. Today, she's going to share how you can activate inspiration in the workplace. She's also going to share with us a framework that shows how transformative inspiration can be. Our hope is that you walk away with new ideas on how inspiration can drive creativity, agility, as well as powerful results. Alison.
Thank you so much, Joya. I really appreciate it. Welcome, everyone, business leaders, marketing executives, branding, creative thinkers. Given your role, I suspect that you probably already know the power that inspiring stories and brands can play in terms of transforming results and your relationships with customers. I mean, think about it. Some of the greatest business innovations and growth, industry growth of all time have come from single inspired moments. One of my favorite examples is how the CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings, in 2013 was inspired with the idea to not just distribute content as they have been doing for years, but to begin to create original Oscar-worthy content. And with that inspired idea, it led to transformative growth afterwards. There are endless examples like this of how inspiration has played a pivotal role in business innovation and growth. So you get how powerful it is. But the question is, can you tap into that power of inspiration for yourself when needed? When you are working on your business strategy, when you're brainstorming new ideas, when you are overwhelmed or stuck on a particular project, do you know how to initiate and activate inspiration as a tool to transform your own thinking and drive forward your progress? Well, today I'm going to share with you something that's going to help you generate better results for yourself and your business. And it's a new way of thinking about and applying inspiration as a resource, a free resource that you get to tap into. I'm going to begin by sharing a not so flattering personal story about a time that I was very uninspired, a time that I nearly gave up on something that was important to me. So back in early 2000s, I was in graduate school working and studying fine art and education. At that time, it was my dream come true. And think about it, art school, it should have been a nonstop inspiration extravaganza, right? Yet, ironically, it was one of the most uninspired times of my life. On one particularly painful and difficult day, I ran out of the studio after yet another brutal art critique. I had been slammed again for making, quote, pretty pictures of dogs. Here you can see a couple examples of such pretty pictures that I was painting. I was criticized for being safe, literal, status quo. Yeah, these were creative and nice, but they weren't innovative or inspired. And this was hard to hear because I really was giving 110%, and I didn't know how to get inspired. I was so discouraged in that moment that I decided that I was going to drop out of graduate school that day. Out of desperation, because I was so upset, I went to the one place that I knew would bring me some comfort and joy, a place that I had volunteered for years, the Animal Welfare League of Arlington. When I showed up at the shelter, I grabbed my leash, went to the back into the kennel, but instead of getting a dog out of the cage to walk, I was so upset and frustrated that I just collapsed down on the concrete floor and sat there. I was so upset and I just surrendered myself in the moment. I think about this as my cold concrete floor moment. It's when I wanted to give up, when I wanted to quit, when I was so uninspired. Have you ever felt this way? Defeated, like you failed, like you want to give up, and there's nothing that you can do to change it. You're lacking vision about how to move forward. Think about it. What's your cold concrete floor moment? You know, it's in these toughest moments when we actually need inspiration the most. We need it to lift us up, to see new possibilities, to call us to take action. But sadly, even though we know we need inspiration in these moments, we don't think about it as something that we can just produce or create for ourselves. I mean, think about it. Looking back in time, historians and religious texts, even artists, refer to inspiration as this unexpected thing that descends upon you, almost like a muse. And sometimes it can happen that way. In fact, in this moment, when I was sitting on the cold concrete floor, that's kind of what happened. As I sat there on that floor, I just allowed my brain to be present and wander. And I started observing my surroundings. Now, at first, the dogs were all barking at me because they wanted me to take them for a walk. But after a while, they ignored me, and I became one of the pack. As I started to observe and notice what was happening, I saw that every time a person walked by the door or there was a noise outside, that the dogs would get up and move in these predictable patterns. You know, for years, I had seen dogs as dogs, but suddenly I was seeing new possibilities. I was seeing these fascinating patterns that I'd never seen before. And I felt a sudden urge to take action, to sketch them. You can see here some of those initial drawings of these patterns, each unique to each dog. I then was so excited about this that I went home and I started painting what I was seeing. And I created this series of paintings that were these patterns from these dogs. So what happened in that totally uninspired concrete floor moment was that I went from seeing dogs as dogs to seeing something that was different, patterns I had never seen before. It transformed my way of seeing because I was inspired. Now, inspiration in that moment, it came to me like a muse. It was unexpected, it was sudden, it was powerful, and it elevated what I was able to see and inspired me to take action. I truly felt in my heart and here the power of inspiration to drive better results. And it was this experience and then many others in my life afterwards that then made me want to understand, well, what is inspiration in here in my head? How does it work? Because I'm a social science nerd. I want to understand things. If inspiration is this powerful that it can drive better results and innovation, then how does it work? And how can we create it rather than waiting for it to happen? So in 2015, my two colleagues, Jen Grace Barron, Sandy Spatara, and I, we went off and conducted hundreds of interviews, studied social science literature to try to understand inspiration more deeply. And what we know now is this: when you're inspired, two things are happening. One, you're seeing greater possibilities. So rather than seeing a dog as a dog, I suddenly saw a dog as a pattern. And think about this with your own business challenges and problems when you need new ideas, new possibilities. But it's not just that. Because what also happens when you're inspired is that you have a sudden urge and confidence to take action in new ways. We call this invincibility. And this is what drove me to start sketching and painting and creating this series that ended up being acclaimed. When you combine possibility and invincibility, and you have that spark of inspiration, wow, it is powerful. It's like rocket fuel. And it's one of the most underrated and important resources, I would argue, in modern work. I mean, think about inspiration being at the root of some of the most exquisite performances that you see. Some of the most extraordinary leaders, the most mind-blowing innovations and social movements begin with a spark of inspiration. We often call this big I inspiration when it has big changes like it did that day in my life. But the truth is, inspiration can also serve us in the quieter, less glamorous, but equally important moments. We call this little I inspiration. Like when you have to have a hard conversation with a colleague, when you have to come up with a new business strategy, when you're changing a career, when you're raising a child, when you're doing something that scares you, but you know will help you grow. In these more daily kinds of moments, we also need inspiration to help us see new possibilities and give us the courage and confidence to take action. So I want you to think back on that cold concrete floor moment that you thought of earlier. What if you could have activated inspiration in that moment when you needed it the most? Well, here's the good news. I'm here to tell you that you can. But first, you got to change how you think about inspiration. We have to debunk 3 common myths. The first myth is that inspiration's for the chosen few. It's for creative types. It's for artists. Not true. After interviewing all of these business leaders, it is a critical driving force of innovation in business, and it's a human emotion that we can all experience. Second, can we change the myth that inspiration is unexpected? You don't know when it's going to strike. True, it can happen that way, as it did for me that day, but the best business leaders don't wait for inspiration to happen. They actually look for it and they create it when they need it the most. Not only that, they even build it into how they work with their teams and in their company culture. Third, can we change the myth that inspiration is fleeting, that you feel it and then it just goes away suddenly, that you can't really control it? Now, I'm not saying you should walk around feeling inspired every second of every day. That would be unrealistic and not so human. But the truth is, when it comes to those areas of your life that matter most to you, you can actually sustain inspiration over time. When you think about some of the business leaders or even scientists who have tackled really tough challenges and problems over years, even decades, they've had to sustain their inspiration over that time. You can do that. So hopefully I've shifted a little bit of how you think about inspiration. You might be wondering, okay, great. So how do I begin to do this? How do I start? Well, the key is starting with knowing what inspires you. And that's the lesson that I learned on the cold concrete floor at the kennel. Now, the ways that people can get inspired are endless. In fact, we think about inspiration like a fingerprint, completely unique to each individual. You really have to discover it for yourself. But the good news is you do not have to start from scratch. We have done some heavy legwork for you. In fact, in our research, we found 18 different drivers. We call them engines of inspiration. These are things that you can either think about differently or different actions that you can take that make it more likely for inspiration to occur. Now, I'm not going to get into all of these right now. We do speak about them at length in our book, Dare to Inspire. But the important point for you to take away is that each person uniquely identifies the drivers that work best for them. There's different combinations that work for different people, and you can discover this for yourself. In my cold concrete floor moment, I discovered two important engines for me. One was unstructured time. So I was sitting there allowing my brain to be open. I wasn't trying to create or produce anything. While I was experiencing that unstructured time, I was also in an environment that was moving to me, inspiring to me. Now, this is really impersonal. Not everybody's inspired by a kennel, but I am. And for me, this combination is what produced the extraordinary transformation of how I was seeing and the results for me. Now, a quick way for you to think about and discover your own inspiration fingerprint is to think about a recent best day, a day that you were at your best in the flow. And when you imagine that day for you, think about what was happening, what made it possible. We've asked hundreds of business leaders this question about their best days and moments, and they've answered with things like, I have my best days when there's breathing room in my schedule to think. I have my best days when I start the day off with a team meeting and we talk about the difference that we're going to make. I have my best days when I feel most connected to my purpose and my why. I have my best days when I take a break, go for a walk in nature, or talk to my mentor for advice. So the first step is really understanding what inspires you most. So back to my power combo, unstructured time and inspiring environments that I discovered at the kennel. The thing is, once you discover that code for yourself, you can use it. I now use this to drive better results in my business. For example, last fall, I was stuck around a particular business problem. I took a couple days off to just hike and ride horses, and I didn't think about the problems at all. But when I came back, I suddenly had this flurry of solutions. I'm not the only one who's inspired by this combination. You may know of the story of Howard Schultz, who attributes the original idea for Starbucks to a day that he had coffee in Milan, and he called the experience of being in that environment transcendent. Lin-Manuel Miranda, he wrote many of the songs for Hamilton when he was sitting in Aaron Burr's house and chair, because that environment and that unstructured time was moving to him. So when you know what drives inspiration for you, you can think about it strategically and plan opportunities in the week ahead. So I actually plan unstructured time in inspiring places into my week ahead. When you do this, we call it intentional practice. And it's what actually takes that possibility and invincibility of inspiration and it turns it into something that is sustainable. We call it sustainable inspiration. Now, I've been focusing mostly on how you can inspire yourself because I do believe that a leader's first job is to inspire yourself. You model it for others. But just imagine, if you need to inspire your team, try kicking off a meeting using one of these engines of inspiration. You want more inspirational company culture? How about building in engines into your performance management systems or onboarding process? These are just a few ideas. There are endless ideas. Think of the 18 engines as a paint palette that you can choose to blend and create new pathways for yourself and others. So back to that story about the Humane Society, I have a little secret to share with you. And it's something that I've never shared publicly before. Although I have an MFA, Master's in Fine Art, for a decade, I purposely omitted MFA from my title, my resumes, my bios, even my conversations with people, because I thought I wouldn't be taken seriously as a CEO, an author, an executive coach, which are all my great passions today and how I bring my creativity to life today. I've learned to see this experience differently. I now know that my cold concrete floor experience of being uninspired and nearly quitting graduate school, it was a gift that taught me how inspiration has the power to transform thinking. And now I use that same skill to solve business challenges with innovation, agility, and better results. I've learned how inspiration is a critical ingredient to my performance and success. And if it's critical to your success, your leadership, your teams, your brand, your company, now is the time to make it a priority. And you can do that. You can own your own inspiration by first knowing what reliably inspires you, exploring those 18 engines, thinking about your toughest concrete floor moments and your best days to understand the types of actions and thoughts that produce inspiration for you. When you know them, you can tap into them intentionally and more regularly. Listen, y'all, we have so many challenges that we are facing coming up in the next few weeks, in 2020, and in the year ahead. We have so many challenges and problems that we need to solve together. The world needs your inspiration to do that. So my request for you is don't hope for inspiration to happen. Don't wait for it. Choose it and practice it. Thank you, and enjoy the conference ahead.
Alison, thank you. That was so wonderful. I am still thinking about the statement that you made, which is to plan unstructured time in inspiring environments. And I'm immediately thinking about the Met, right? I live not so far away from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it's someplace that I love to go and be able to plan to go. But now I moved to Brooklyn and I don't make it up there as often as I used to. But is that might be grandiose, but what's a simple way for us to be able to execute on that?
A simple way to execute on unstructured time
in inspiring environments.
Inspiring environments. Yeah. Well, you know, it's hard to answer because what people think of as an inspiring environment is so personal. Mm-hmm. For example, my sister and I talk about this because my sister loves going to the beach and she loves sitting on the beach, listening to the waves, the sand, everything about it, the sun. And I go to the beach and I hate it. I feel hot. I don't like the wind blowing my hair. I don't like the sand. It feels grindy to me and it's just yuck. So it's so personal what people find moving and inspiring. But, you know, people do tend to have a sense of what that is for them.
Yeah.
You know, and so when you do, you can seek it out. I know for me, because I can't go to a kennel every day and I can't, you know, take off a few days and go horseback riding or hiking every day. But I do have a couple paths that are near my house that are really beautiful. And I do intentionally take walks along those paths and have that unstructured time. And I try to do it almost every morning. It doesn't happen every morning, but I try to build it in as much as I can. And it does make a difference.
And when you say unstructured time, is it an hour? Is it 15 minutes? Like, I'm a small business owner, as are many people probably listening, or maybe not, but you know, what's enough unstructured time?
Yeah, it's a great question that's come up for me. And I hate to say again that it's personal, but I think about it almost like, you know, if you're going out, let's say to exercise or to train for an event, sometimes you're going to want to do sprints and sometimes you're going to want to run marathons. Mm-hmm. When you think about work in that way, sometimes you are in a situation in work that it's like a marathon and you just have to hustle. By the end of it, you're likely to need a bigger kind of unstructured time reset, you know, a couple days to really get into the groove and have that open, free time for your brain. If you're doing more sprints, or if your work is more steady state, then having shorter increments, more frequent unstructured time can be helpful. I actually like to do both. So I try to build in a couple times a week that I'll have a couple hours. That's what I aim for. But in addition, I try also to once a quarter to have a full day, which again is hard. I have little kids, lots of obligations, but I try to take a full day of unstructured time. So that's what I aim for. But again, it's personal. When I was learning about Lin-Manuel Miranda and how he, got his ideas and things for Hamilton and learning from others, people have different ideas of what they need for unstructured time.
You bring up a good point, because a lot of us, especially women, are feeling really overloaded right now. We're the primary caretakers, either of aging parents or of young children. There's homeschooling, there's on and on and on and on. So if we want, as a small business owner, to find inspiration in our everyday, right? And we want to be able to build that in, as Jeff Weiner, who's the former CEO of LinkedIn, said, you have to build in meaningful breaks in your day. So how can I find inspiration in those meaningful little breaks, maybe at lunch or at 3 o'clock?
Ooh, I love that. Yeah, I think the idea of scheduling in time when you can find something that's meaningful to you is really, really important. We talk about in the book that there's these kind of 3 primary pathways to getting inspired. So some people look more inwardly, like, unstructured time, reading books, listening to music, things that are more internal. Some people look to relationships. So other people that they connect with, mentors, heroes, relationships. And then other people focus more on environment, the situation around them. And of course, we can all experience inspiration from all 3 of these, but we often have a place that we go to, more readily. So even if you think about it that way, you might be a person who on that break, you really need to connect with someone. You need to have those people that, when you talk to, you feel a boost, they lift you up. And that can be a really important practice. For me personally, I tend to use more of the personal engines. So even just earlier today, I didn't get the best sleep last night, which is, always a risk when you've got 2 little kids and a kitten in the house. So I was listening to music, and I was using music as a way to activate inspiration and emotions, positive emotions.
I did a core values exercise with some of my members here today. I gave them like 50 core values. I had them pick 5 and then winnow it down to 2. And the reason that I did that exercise is if you feel on a day-to-day basis, when you look at your work calendar, you look at all your commitments and they are out of alignment with those top 2 values, that's when everything feels out of alignment. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Ooh, I love that. I love that. That is a fantastic way to think about one of our 18 engines of inspiration we call values and purpose. And it's actually the first one that we write about in our book, because when we were doing the research and interviewing people, values and purpose, which are very tightly aligned together. I think of values as what moves you, and purpose is how you take values into action in the world. So they're very closely aligned. We found that the values and purpose, it came up in almost every conversation that we had with people in terms of what inspires them. So I almost think about it as the super engine of inspiration. That if you only tap into one engine, focus on values and purpose, because it's there for you. So I love that exercise. I think it's a great way to hone in on what matters most to you. And I might even ask the participants to, so they know what their top 2 values are, then think about, well, what are 2 or 3 ways that I would bring those values into action in terms of my choices, behaviors, or what I'm doing that day. And even that granular in terms of how they're going to act according to their values can also be really inspiring.
My top 2 were adventure and beauty, which I think most people did not expect, but I'm always thinking about how I can incorporate a little bit of adventure into each of my work days. Alison, thank you. This is a wonderful keynote, and we look forward to seeing everybody at the conference throughout the rest of the week.
Thank you so much. It was a joy to be here and talk about this topic that I think is great, really relevant to everyone, and more important today than ever before.
Amazing. Thank you.